I'm Tal Hazak-Lowy, Executive Director of Friends of the Children Chicago. At Friends of the Children, our work begins with a simple belief. Every child deserves a stable, supportive foundation from which to grow. We pair children facing the greatest risk factors with highly trained, salaried professional mentors. We commit to staying by each child's side for 12 and a half years, no matter what. What we see every day in our work is that for a child to truly flourish, our efforts of support can't be just for the child. Today, we're here to explore a crucial question. How can we increase the likelihood of youth success by empowering entire families? Because when it comes to child well-being, one truth is inescapable. Children do not experience life in isolation. A child's well-being and ability to learn are inseparable from their home environment. When a child is learning to read or develop other skills, they do not magically suspend the trauma or stress that they may be experiencing at home. If they didn't have a bed to sleep in, or if they witnessed abuse at home, they aren't going to be in the brain state to learn. Too often, our human service systems operate in silos. Literacy initiatives, for example, don't typically address housing or trauma, but human beings don't live in silos. Families often face a web of challenges: housing insecurity, limited healthcare, unstable employment, food insecurity, and these directly shape a child's growth, behavior, and learning. When caregivers struggle with depression, violence, or lack of support, children carry those burdens too. Achieving true well-being requires addressing all of these things. They're all connected. As a child-serving organization, of course, we start with the child. But to truly help children, we must support their families as whole units. That's the principle behind two-gen or whole family approaches. By supporting families and caregivers, we increase the likelihood of the child's success. By empowering families and connecting them to resources, we stabilize households and unlock opportunities for children to thrive. When we invest in the whole family, we're not just helping one generation, we're changing the trajectory for generations to come. At Friends Chicago, our mission is to create generational change by empowering youth who live in communities most impacted by poverty, gun violence, and trauma. All of the youth in our program have experienced multiple adverse childhood experiences, such as exposure to violence, loss, instability, or neglect. We give them the relationships and space to feel safe and secure, and we help them build essential skills like literacy and goal setting. But none of that is enough if the environment around them is still unsafe or unstable. That's why we integrate support for caregivers into everything we do. Take Rashawn, an 8th grader in our program. Rashawn has been with us since kindergarten and is being raised by a single mother. Recently, his mother began dating a man who became physically abusive. Rashawn saw the man hurting his mom, and he beat him up in order to defend his mother. We can't ignore that reality while focusing solely on his reading scores or high school readiness. To help Rashawn succeed, we must support his mother too. Because we incorporate a two-gen approach, our family and community engagement team can connect his mom to domestic violence services and safe housing. Our on-site therapists can provide free, trauma-informed counseling for both mother and son. Rashawn's mentor, Willie, can help him find ways to address and channel his anger. Perhaps most importantly, we keep showing up for both of them, mother and child, no matter what, even if they aren't ready, willing, or able to take specific actions or utilize particular support or services. And through our broader community, we can offer them a network of unconditional and non-judgmental care and belonging. A two-gen approach is not just about fixing immediate crises. It's about creating conditions for long-term stability and opportunity. That's what we're going to dig into today. How we can create safer, stronger, more equitable communities by recognizing that every child's future is tied to the stability of their entire family. I'm excited to have two incredible panelists with us today. I'll share a few highlights about them now, but if you'd like to know more, we're posting links to their bios and agencies in our chat. Dr. Clinton Boyd Jr. is the Executive Director of Fathers, Families, and Healthy Communities and a researcher at Chapin Hall. In these roles, Dr. Boyd draws on his lived and academic experiences to champion policies and programs that empower resilient fathers, strengthen families, and address systemic inequities. Welcome, Clinton. Marjorie Sims is the managing director of Ascend at the Aspen Institute, which is a catalyst and convener for diverse leaders working across systems and sectors to build intergenerational family well-being by intentionally focusing on children and adults in their lives together. Marjorie has more than 20 years of experience in advancing the status of women and families. Welcome, Marjorie. In other words, folks, we have with us today two powerhouse people. Welcome to you both.
Dr. Morgan.
Okay.
Said, just send them.
I'd love to hear your perspective. Clinton, I'll start with you. If our goal is to change the trajectory of a child's life, why must we also invest in the well-being of their parents and caregivers? For example, if we're helping a child learn how to read, why does it matter that we support their caregivers too?
Thank you for the question. But before I respond to it, I just want to say how honored and humbled I am to be numbered among you all today. It's really absolute pleasure to have this opportunity to not just give voice to the men and the fathers that I represent through FFHC, and also thinking about the research that I produce at Chapin Hall. It's really just a joy to be able to speak truth to power, especially at a time when truth and justice are under siege, not just. And so, with that being said, now I will respond to your question. And I think it's important to acknowledge up front that children do not grow up in programs, they grow up in families. And so if you have a child that is learning to read, but the lights are off at home, or if a father is struggling or to choose between food and paying rent, or if you have a mother that's fighting every day just to keep the household stable, then that child is learning under stress, and stressed children really struggle to thrive. And so we just know from our research at FFHC, which is grounded in the lived experiences of Black men from across Chicago, and even some of the more national work that I've done, that family instability really isn't the result of individual failure. It's really a product of systems that have failed families for generations. And I think it's just important to acknowledge that as a fact. And so one of the things that we uncovered in our Breaking the Chains report, which was released back in April, is we heard from fathers who described how joblessness, housing insecurity, child support debt, and various health challenges that they had really had this direct ripple effect onto their children. And so the economic instability for them really became emotional instability as well. And the children of the fathers, and I would even say mothers too, right? They carry that weight with them. And so when we talk about a two-gen model, well, talking about telling the truth. And if you want strong children, you invest in strong caregivers. And so when you have fathers, mothers, or just parents and caregivers who have stable employment, access to mental health care supports, their basic needs are met, um, and a system that isn't working against them, their children just instantly benefit from it academically, emotionally, and even socially. And so I would just close by saying you can't build a thriving child in a collapsing household. And so a 2-gen approach really is about building a foundation um, around family stability so children can stand tall.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate that. Marjorie, will you share with us your perspective?
Absolutely. And first, let me also add my thanks to having Ascend be a part of this conversation. We're deeply honored. And, this approach of a 2-generation or whole family approach, Ascend sits at the national level. And we have a leadership program. We're honored to have Clinton be one of our Ascend fellows, leaders like him across the country, but also a national network of nonprofit organizations and associations that are taking a 2-generation or whole family approach. So what we know is that 2-generation approaches, this concept is not new. It is inherent in Indigenous communities here and around the globe. And that's how families work, right? They do not work in siloed systems. They work as units collectively. And if you think about it, it's so intuitive, a 2-generation approach, right? That if you have a family in your neighborhood who experiences a crisis, you don't go to that family and say, "How may I help your children?" You say, "How may I help your family?" Because
Right.
that's how families work. And over decades, there has been research documenting that when you support the entire family, you have better outcomes for both the children and their parents. And the children over generations, right? Dr. James Heckman, who is a Nobel laureate, has done this research for 30 years, sharing that when you provide high quality early care to children and supports to that family, you have successfully broken intergenerational poverty, right? And so there's research that demonstrates why supporting both parents and children together is important for their economic mobility, but also it's just inherently how families work. So thank you for the question.
Thank you. And right, it seems so obvious,
Mhm.
but yet it's not. So that's why we're having this panel. So thank you for sharing your beautiful voices. Marjorie, Ascend partners with more than 600 organizations that are implementing 2-gen approaches. This slide illustrates the spectrum of services that build towards outcomes for the whole family. Can you share your thoughts on this spectrum and whether you think there's an approach that's most effective?
Yes, absolutely. And I would say the approach that's most effective is a 2-generation or a whole family approach, right? This work is about getting to the center, the whole family. And as Clinton shared, families don't work in siloed ways. They're navigating siloed systems that have denied them opportunity. And so on one hand, you have child-focused programs, and on the other, side, you have adult focused programs. And oftentimes, the way that those services are provided are really intentionally provided to an individual member of the family, but to the exclusion of other members of the family. And the recognition that it's a unit that, is working together. And so for child-focused programs, it's really important that those programs understand that there are parents or caregivers that have a direct impact on that child's success, right? So when parents succeed, children succeed. When children are in safe, nurturing environments, parents also have opportunities to succeed. And I want to give a shout out to a former Ascend colleague who's on this call, Brendan Creamer. He actually helped create this, graphic for us demonstrating how you get to a whole family approach and recognizing that families come in many, many different, kind of shapes structures and complexities, right? And so our job as practitioners is to support that family as they define what their family is for us.
Beautiful. Thank you very much. Clinton, Fathers, Families, and Healthy Communities works towards a Chicago where Black fathers thrive. You've described investing in fathers as a cornerstone for transforming families and communities. What are we learning about the unique power of fatherhood in advancing two-gen outcomes?
Yeah, well, what our work at Father Families and Healthy Communities shows, and what the data confirm, is that Black fathers are one of the most underutilized yet powerful levers for family and community transformation. And that's not based on myth. It's not based on sentiment. It's based on evidence, right? And so even going back to 2013, the CDC released a national report that told us Black fathers, regardless if they stay in the household or not, are the most engaged fathers in the country when compared to fathers from other racial and ethnic groups. And even going back to our Breaking the Chains policy report that we released earlier this year, where we spoke with 172 Black men and fathers across the city of Chicago, it confirmed the same thing, right? These men are deeply committed to their children, even while navigating these oppressive systems or navigating racism, exclusion from the formal economy and the labor market, and economic instability. And yet, almost every system designed to support families is either built around mothers or maternal caregivers and around deficit narratives about Black men. And so if we're allowing the truth and evidence and data to guide us, it will suggest that when you invest in a father, you stabilize households, families, and communities. And in our work at FFHC, uh, oh, thank you. And so like at our work at FFHC, whenever a father's basic needs are met, in terms of like access to food, transportation, hygiene supplies, childcare for their children, like his emotional bandwidth expands and he has the ability to just show up differently. His confidence increases, his relationships and his personal and professional life improve, and his children or their children just feel safer and more supported. And so what I'll just say in closing is that like fathers are really just change agents because their healing becomes their children's healing, and the economic stability of our fathers leads to the stability of their children and their offspring. And so when we just lift up a father, we lift up a family. And if we lift up families, we're lifting up entire communities.
What I love about having you both is that every question, I just want to sit and talk about that part just for an hour, but we'll keep going. Both of your organizations emphasize the importance of parent voice. How can programs ensure that parents are genuinely shaping the services that affect them and their children? So Marjorie, let's start with you.
Thank you. And there are many ways, right? And that parent voice is so critical to informing the design of programs, the implementation of programs, and the assessment of them, as well as policies, right? And so one of the first things that programs can do is, and this is, a pretty light lift, is survey parents, right? Just survey them and understand what their needs are, what their opportunities are, what their goals are, so that as you're designing programs, implementing programs, that you have that level of information. We always encourage organizations to go beyond that, and in ways that you're actually not only engaging parent voice and their recommendations, but also increasing their own social capital, and that's how you bring parents together in an intentional way to help them, bridge and bond and navigate public and informal programs for themselves. Oftentimes, families that live in communities that have been marginalized, they're very isolated. And so how do you design, opportunities for parents, families to come together so that they're building that social capital? And it does not have to, cost a lot of money. It could be simply, providing space once a month for, a meal that you're providing families, supporting them with their, childcare needs, but allowing them to design their own agendas and understand how they can support each other is really important. But that parent voice in the design, implementation, and assessment of programs is very important. And if you bring on parents for more of a consultancy role, make certain that you're valuing their time and for their expertise and what they're offering to organizations in terms of consultancy.
Thank you. Clinton, what would you say about why or how do we ensure that parent voice is included in the programs that are there to serve them?
Yeah, I mean, for us at FFHC, we recognize our fathers are not clients, right? They're co-creators. And so for us, about 70% of our work is direct engagement with our fathers and our families, and the other 30%, I would say, is the policy research, policy advocacy. And so for us, we recognize that our fathers, they're not data points. They're, again, like designers of the very systems that are meant to serve them. And it means that we just stop assuming what families need and spend the time asking them, listening to them, and sharing power, especially if we're trying to uplift and empower communities that have been disempowered by systems of tyranny and oppression. And so, in a lot of our work at FFHC, Black fathers, they've just made it clear that they want to be heard and not necessarily managed, and they want to have their wisdom valued and not be judged for their struggles or even past mistakes that they may have made. One of my favorite books is Brian Stevenson's Just Mercy. And in there, he often reflects on this notion that people are more than the worst thing they've ever done. And so that's the spirit out of which we operate at FFHC oftentimes tell people that our work is more redemptive than anything else. We have a no wrongdoer policy, and it's our job and responsibility to make sure that our fathers see programs at FFHC that reflect their truths. And these programs are culturally grounded, trauma informed, and just affirming. And when the fathers see that, they tend to lean in. And the last point that I would make is for us, we recognize the barriers that our fathers face were intentionally built. And because of that, we do everything in our power to work with our fathers to intentionally dismantle them and build and erect new systems that have justice, righteousness, and equity at the forefront and at the center of it. And that's what parent voice and action looks like for us at FFHC and under my leadership at the organization.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. I think those are really, really important points. And I want to have a follow-up question because I really believe in what you all say that you have to ask people what they need, what's going to help them, because people don't want to have other people tell them how to live their lives. And where I got stuck in our prep call was what does our work, day-to-day work look like when caregivers are facing real complex challenges? So if there's a caregiver who's struggling with addiction or struggling with depression as a result of all the systems that are working against them and are perhaps making not great choices for their child, but because of the circumstances. So what does that work look like in the day-to-day? versus in the design and implementation? Clinton, we'll start with you.
Yeah, well, again, this is what we do at Fathers, Families, and Healthy Communities. Uh, to start, it's important to note that we take a strengths-based, asset-based approach to our work with fathers. And so while we recognize our guys may have needs when they show up, right? And there's this tendency in the nonprofit to needs assessment, but we also want to take stock of the strengths, the characteristics, and attributes of our. But even with that being said, whenever our fathers into our program, many of them, the weight of joblessness, the weight of housing instability, the weight of transportation challenges, the weight of the collateral consequences associated with mass incarceration, the enormous weight of mental health strain. And all of this just takes an emotional toll on our men because so many of them feel as if they are treated as disposable by either employers or institutions that are supposed to be family affirming and supposed to support people in times of need. We recognize that these are the systems and the institutions that our men are forced to interact with, and therefore we try to create an atmosphere or an opportunity structure at FFHC that provides them the complete opposite. So much of our work is literally about meeting the basic needs of our men without judgment, without hoops, and without any form of shame. So when they come to us, they get nutritious, healthy meals. Fathers, families, healthy communities, right? We help them with the hygienic needs that they may have, right? And so we make sure they get body wash, lotion, deodorant, toothpaste, toothbrushes. We provide them with transportation vouchers. We have something called dignity-based incentives at FFHC for each session our fathers sit in on, they receive a $25 Visa gift card. And it's important to note that we are working with primarily young fathers between the ages of 18 to 26. So many of our fathers are connected to some of the local community violence intervention programs, specifically Chicago CRED. And we're a data-driven organization, and what we now know about this second open window from the age of 18 to 26 is that immediate gratification is something that is real for young adults. And so it didn't make any sense in us incentivizing our fathers at the end of the program. We found ways to build the incentives into each touch point that we've had with the fathers, and it's allowed us to be quite successful in our work. And the last thing I'll say is that for us, support is not a handout. It's really a catalyst for human dignity and family transformation. Like I oftentimes tell people, the healthy in our name, when you deconstruct the word healthy, the base word is heal. We are helping our fathers to heal emotionally, physically, financially, and spiritually. And once we help them heal, then we can help them to build stronger families, stronger communities, and ultimately they can contribute to us as a society building a stronger, healthier nation.
Thank you. Thank you for that very much. Marjorie, what would you say? So, right when caregivers are really struggling, sort of complex challenges today, what does that look like?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And I do think that it has to be a more comprehensive approach, right? And recognizing that, families, you have to be able to support them when they're ready to be supported, right? But engaging the voices, it's about, all of those that are in the community and understanding broader needs. that may indicate what are some of the needs and struggles of those that aren't showing up, right? So making certain that you have a more comprehensive strategy. It's not just a few, parents that you're engaging, but as many as possible to gather that data. And then making certain, as Clinton has been sharing, is what are the supports and services or policies that you're supporting across your community, as making certain that families' basic needs are being met, right? So that they can then show up, which allows opening for them to participate more fully. And then also making certain that you are designing those opportunities for parents to share their views in a variety of different ways. So like the surveys or home visits or partnering with other community organizations, really important. And then also, I would say, because this work is, has to be intentional, long-term, how are you supporting your staff in a way that, spaces are trauma informed? I know all of you all do such a strong job at that, but, for all organizations and communities to make certain that, staff and your spaces are reflective of, being trauma informed is really important.
Thank you. I love that you both talk about, right, the need of first addressing just people's basic needs. Marjorie, I believe you call it the pressure relief valves, that we have to do that. And then once we help people, any human being, then we can empower their voice to talk about the next thing. Clinton, your blueprint for transformation outlines a vision for dismantling systemic inequities that marginalize Black men. Many of your strategies focus on economic advancement for families. How can youth-serving organizations contribute to this effort and help families move towards financial security?
Right. Thank you for the question. And then, as you referenced in our Blueprint for Transformation policy brief that we released about 2 months ago, we list 8 recommendations. The first recommendation, I think, is the one that has the greatest resonance for the question that you ask, and that's really about building wealth, not just wages. And so when we talk, oftentimes I'm struck by the fact that when we talk about economic mobility for families, we tend to limit the conversation to jobs and short-term income when we really need to be talking about wealth. Because even when you look at that one big beautiful bill that was passed, that was the largest wealth transfer to the most wealthy, connected individuals in our nation. But for families that are oftentimes historically marginalized, left out, and left behind, we have little to zero access to wealth. And when we talk about wealth, it's really wealth that gives families the breathing room, the safety, and the ability to recover during moments of crisis. And so wealth is what will allow us to close the racial wealth gap in this country. And if we're just thinking about what's happening here in Chicago, um, there was a report released back in 2024 that I believe was funded by the Chicago Community Trust that uncovered what many folks already knew to be the case, that in Chicago, the median white families who hold about $210,000 worth of wealth. At the national level, if you just look at what's happening with Black men, there are some statistics that suggest that Black men have a median wealth of about $10,000, which is 8 times less than the wealth of white men. And if you are also to think about this at a national level and just think about Black households on average, we hold about $1 million less wealth than white households. And based on some of the scholarship by some of our country's leading scholars around the topic, of reparations, that's a gap that's been shaped by centuries of racial injustice. And it's important to note that this is none of this happened by accident, right? It's the result of really centuries of federal policy, from the institution of slavery to Jim Crow to redlining to mass incarceration to discriminatory labor and housing policies and exclusion that really created this conundrum within our communities and our systems. And because these harms were perpetuated and created by the federal government is both the culpable and capable party for repairing it. And so that's part of what we speak to in our blueprint for transformation. And for us, it's really about making sure that youth serving and family serving organizations recognize that, and then also think what a way families or the caregivers attached to the youth that may be participating in their program, helping them to get equity, housing models, thinking about credit building and debt relief, thinking about entrepreneurship support, thinking about cooperative models that we can actually advance within our communities. And I would even say thinking about financial literacy programs and things of that nature, and family serving organizations can also advocate for reparative policies at every level, like baby bonds, like guaranteed income, like more progressive tax credits, fair chance hiring, and reparations. And so I'll stop there because I can keep going and going like
I
the interview.
love that you
Right.
shared that with us. I think it's really, really important work. My guess is I am certain that it is, you see the reaction of people listening. I think it's thought-provoking and possibly provoking to other people. And I think these are really, really important conversations to have. So thank you. Marjorie, you alluded to this before, and you stayed in the state of the field. You described social capital, right? So moving from the economic capital to social capital, those are relationships, networks, and bonds of trust as less tangible, but equally vital to family success. So why is social capital so critical, and how can two-gen families help families build
I
and
love the
sustain it?
question and love being part of this conversation again. Clinton's always great to be in spaces with you and learn from you. But social capital, we call it the secret sauce of a two-generation approach. You know, there are these core components of two-gen: early care and education, post-secondary, asset development, and health and well-being, including mental health, and then K-12. But also social capital is one of those core components. It's both a what and a how, an outcome for families. And over the years since, Ascend was founded by Ann Mosley, we have done regular polling and focus groups of families across the country to understand how families with low income are navigating, public programs. And what we found, and I shared this earlier, is that when families are living in marginalized communities, they're often very isolated. They don't trust their neighbor to watch their children, right? And so how do we as practitioners, systems leaders, and policymakers design programs and policies to support that building of social capital? We all have social capital. It very much simply put is those relationships that you can lean on for advice and guidance and resources. So in a very specific example of a program that, is doing social capital is Jefferson County Prosperity Project in Colorado. What they do on a monthly basis is provide a family meal, and they provide childcare. I was explaining this earlier, to all of their Head Start families. Anyone can drop in, participate. It allows the parents to come together and share information and resources. Where do you get your car fixed? Who do you, have support, your budgeting? And, what does it mean to have, a benefit cliff? What is that all about? What should I take this 10-cent raise if I'm going to lose some benefits? Those families, there's wisdom in a room, right? Bringing them together allows them to build community and navigate public programs and policies and systems for themselves. It's really helping them to expand their networks so that they can have greater agency. I'm going to put a link in the chat to a resource that was developed by the Department of Health and Human Services a while ago about how programs can support social capital. And this resource and these tools are really helpful for practitioners as you think about that. Do you do it cohort based? Do you do it individually based? Where are some of those programs, emerging, that can be replicated and scale? Really important. But again, social capital is the secret sauce. Without it, your program, your policy will not succeed to the extent that you would like it to.
Thank you. It's an infrastructure in a person's life, right?
Absolutely.
And we need to make sure it's there. I think we've really made the case why it's important to support not just the youth, but their parents and caregivers and family as well. And I'd like to acknowledge that we have many generous funders on this call as well. And so what role can the funding community play in supporting 2Gen initiatives that are striving to create long-term stability, right? It makes a program much more expensive, and why we shouldn't just focus on small programs that promise to produce miracles in a siloed approach. So Marjorie and then Clinton.
Yeah, I think you've already made the case for the why, and that really is, if you want to have stronger outcomes for families and for communities, a 2-generation whole family approach is effective in the long term. Sometimes that doesn't align with, funding goals. They're much more short term, right? But having a longer term, commitment to communities, to families is what really does support a 2-generation approach. Ascend is really honored to be able to work with, funders across the country that have really invested, designed portfolios to support 2-generation approaches. And I think that there's a lot of learning that philanthropy can do across, these, foundations and philanthropic investments. And I'll put a link in the chat to a report that we released earlier this year, which is the 2Gen investment case, which we documented that over the last 10 years, close to $500 million, and it's probably more now, has been invested in 2-generation pilots and initiatives. What's been learned from them, the outcomes of them, and how to best support them. This was, really, this information was harvested by having a learning and action community comprised of funders that have been in this space. So again, I think there's a lot of learning that can be shared across the philanthropic community about why invest in 2Gen approaches, whole family approaches, and then how to effectively do it.
Wonderful. Thank you. Clinton.
Yeah, I mean, I very much appreciate this question because ideas, and it sounds like I may have a captive audience on the other end of this camera. But in all seriousness, as we've been alluding to, children live in an ecosystem, right? And so if you only water the leaves and never water the roots, the tree will never grow. And so I would encourage folks to just think about the work in that way, because you're really missing a chance to stabilize entire households. You're missing the opportunity to convert crisis to healing. You're missing the generational impact that comes when a father gets a stable job or a mother feels supported, and caregivers see themselves as partners in their children's success. And quite frankly, especially in the moment that we find ourselves in right now as a nation, we need funders that are both bold and courageous enough to fund what actually works and not what is most comfortable. we really got to get to a point and understand that we are probably going to have to sacrifice a safe seat at the table of comfortability in this moment and really lean into our values, right? And so funders must really invest in innovation and prevention and like long-term visions, given where we're at right now, and also Black-led organizations that know their communities and have earned the trust of their communities. I think it's also important to say that as well. And funders must also be willing to take risk because the families that I serve, the fathers that I represent, the communities that I represent, are taking risk every day just trying to survive. And so the least that can be done right now is for our funders to do the same. And if funders want transformation, they got to fund transformation, not just temporary relief. And so, with that, that means we need more sustained, unrestricted, multi-year investments in families and organizations that are the closest to the pain and the solutions. Something that Marjorie said is that our families know what they need, they know what they want. We need funders that are going to put the money in the hands of the individuals who are not going to violate the oath that they made to the community. Because that's what's most important right now. And that is how we build a Chicago, a nation where every child and every caregiver can just flourish and thrive and not merely survive. I can be very passionate at
No,
times.
no, I know. I love your passion and I love your truth telling. I like to say, like, what we've been saying this whole time, like, it's not rocket science what we're talking about. We're talking about providing the families that we work with the basic human dignity and support that every single family, every single human being needs. And you can't give a sprinkling of support and hope to see miracles, right? Like, this work is expensive if we're going to take care of families that are living in poverty and experiencing the outcomes of systemic policies that have been there to keep them oppressed. And so it costs money. So I appreciate that very much. We're getting close to time, so I'm only going to have time for one or two questions. But one of our listeners asked, what more can agencies do to help connect caregivers one to another to create social capital that way and to create support to them? So Clinton and then Marjorie.
Yeah, I mean, some of what I would share has already been reflected in many of the remarks that I've offered. But I do think, especially in the time that we find ourselves in, we have to better recognize and appreciate that we cannot hold up the sky by ourselves. And we really need to align ourselves more closely, more intimately with mission aligned organizations that are willing to hold a piece of the work, recognizing that we're all a part of this larger connective, collective tissue that our families and our children need to thrive in this moment. And so that really means just thinking about the types of formal partnerships that we can enter into right now, where there's just going to be a lot of knowledge shared, resources shared with one another, and even just thinking about collaborative opportunities to go after joint fundraising in this moment. I think that's also something that's just going to be vitally important to get us to the other side of what we're forced to confront right now within our nation, which I do believe is only going to intensify in the months and years ahead. And we have to be willing to name that. And I think this is the other thing that I would share in this moment. Somewhere I read, and some of you all may have read this too, that the truth shall set you free. And if
Mm.
somebody has lied to you in the name of truth, then they are not a friend of you and yours. And so we cannot allow truth and justice to be under siege in this moment. And we have to find ways to continue to resist and fight back, but fight back in a principled, disciplined, intelligent way, where we are really leaning into our morals, our values, and the value that we have to cling to more than anything else right now in this moment is righteousness. Because we have to be on the right side of this thing and not the wrong one.
Thank you. Marjorie.
I love the question, and I would be remiss if I didn't say join the Ascend Network. And I'm putting a link in the chat to share information about the Ascend Network, because I believe I have the best job on the planet, because I get to work with people every day that are Utah, that are Clinton, people that know that these systems are broken for families, and they're working really hard to change them, right? Change the narrative, change the program, change the practices, change the policies. And our network, as you know, we've shared, is close to 650 nonprofit organizations in every state, DC, Puerto Rico. 3 years ago, we had an organization join from Ireland and Rwanda and Guatemala, and recently the UK, demonstrating that two-generation whole family approaches are inherent in Indigenous communities around the world. People want a large learning community. There's always a lot of wisdom in the room. We're about bringing those leaders together to be inspired, to support each other, to lift up, community-led solutions, opportunities for that connection. So join the network if you want to, really, collaborate, across, community systems that, are in support of families. But thank you for that question. Love it.
Thank you. So I have to say, I love my job so much also, and I have many favorite parts, but one of them is I get to meet and learn from brilliant people like you.
Mm-hmm.
So on behalf of all of us, I want to thank you both, Marjorie and Clinton, for spending this hour with us.
Thank you.
I think our conversation today makes it crystal clear that if we want to build stronger, safer, more equitable communities, we must stop thinking of child and family support as separate issues. Every child's future depends on the well-being of the adults in their lives. When we intentionally support both child and caregiver, the results ripple outward to schools, neighborhoods, and entire cities. I'm excited about all of us working together to build systems that reflect that truth. Helping children means helping families. When we do that, we all rise together. This afternoon, I'll be sending you an email which includes a short video featuring several caregivers in our program who speak about the power of belonging and the impact it's had on them and their kids. One way you can support this work right away is by sharing the recording of today's panel with your network that will also be included in the email. Keep an eye on your inbox this afternoon for the link and a few other suggestions about how to get involved. Thank you all very, very much for being with us today. Have a great afternoon. Bye-bye.